I'll just stick with that one.
So this is Daygan Robinson, and he's one of the contributors to this book by Rosanne Gallagher that's being launched today, The Lockdown Years. It's the fourth book in the Memories series. So Daygan, what's your role in this?
Yeah, so I'm here today to celebrate what Rosanne's done. This is the fourth book she's done, and she asked me to donate my story of lockdown, which is in here. There we are. And everyone's different, stories, different perspectives from all walks of life, and I'd recommend you buy it. It's very, very interesting. So yeah, do try and support your local writers and artists and musicians, of course. Thank you.
Great. Was it a sad story you wrote or a happy story?
Oh, about the story. Yeah, well, I won't go too into it because, it's worth getting the book, basically. But yeah, because I look after my mother. She needed a shoulder operation. She's got bad arthritis, osteo and rheumatoid. And it was in the lockdown, and it was around the time where, it was really, the illusion was strong that the mainstream media was putting out there, hoodwinking, millions of people. But my mum wised up to that. She didn't want any injection for COVID. But she did go to the hospital, so there was quite a lot of resistance with me and my mum being there, as you can imagine. They're okay when you're in the theatre bit, but other bits, it was quite a time really. There was a lot of hatred getting fired at people, and now it's all forgotten. And these people who are injected are probably feeling a bit idiotic in some ways, because I don't want them to feel like an idiot. A lot of them are hoodwinked and peer pressured and coerced.
To serve lunch. So is everybody seated and have a knife and fork in front of them if you've ordered a lunch?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to give you something to eat and then we'll get going. I'm Rosanne, and I'd like to say a big welcome to you all. Thank you very much for being here today and for supporting me, the fourth book in the Memories series, the series I began back in 2021. And this book is called Memories of the Lockdown Years. Earlier this week, one of my last minute thoughts, I wrote to all my wonderful writers and I asked them if they would like to do me a little recording, a little video of themselves, of their stories, just short, where they were when COVID struck, how they felt, how they coped with it, how they dealt with it, and just talk a little bit about why they wanted to share their story in one of my books. And so I thought I'd just start off today by telling you what inspired me to start writing back in 2021. And really it was that I saw, as I'm sure all of us in this room saw, huge division amongst people. Huge division. We all had very strong opinions when we heard about COVID, and many of us voiced our opinions, and we found often we were quite surprised that some of our dearest, oldest friends didn't necessarily share those opinions. And we also witnessed people starting to be quite unpleasant to each other, relationships falling to pieces, marriages breaking up, friendships being lost. So one day in June 2021, I woke up and I decided I would start collecting people's stories. So the aim of that was I felt that if we shared our stories with others and other people read our stories, we might not agree. It wasn't necessary to persuade people to think as we did, but it might create understanding amongst us all, and we could certainly stop calling each other names. So that was my inspiration. So I wrote to about 30 people, most of the people were friends of mine, and most of them came back and said, yes, I'd love to be part of your project. I'd love to share my story. So I was absolutely delighted, and I gave them a time frame, which was, it was June then. I said, I need your stories by the end of August. You've got 2 months to get your stories to me, and they all said, yes, that's absolutely fine. So as I was sitting there thinking, oh, that's great, but all these lovely people are then saying stories. It then occurred to me that I needed a publisher. This is very typical me. I think of something I want to do, and then I sort of find my way to getting there. So I wrote off to 6 publishers, and 5 of them immediately wrote back saying they would be happy to help me self-publish, but they couldn't meet me, they couldn't see me because of COVID restrictions. They could only have a Zoom call with me. The 6th publisher, Rachel from the Choir Press in Gloucester, she wrote back to me and said, yep, great, give me a ring, come up and meet me and we can talk about it. So for me it was very important to sit with her face to face. Jo drove me up there, we went up to Gloucester, we probably spent 3 hours with her. She was very lovely, she was very open-minded, and she's worked with me now on all 4 books. So that was great. But she said to me during that meeting, what I need you to do, Rosanne, I told her I wanted it printed before Christmas, what I need you to do is send me the edited stories by such and such a date, and then I can get them published for you. So as we were driving home, I thought, crikey, I need somebody to edit and help me with the layout. And within a week, some very good friends of mine wrote to me and said they'd like to be part of the project, but also that they would be happy to edit, and they were professional editors. So I had a team, and we went ahead with the stories, I collected, we edited, and the book was published before Christmas that year, and it was 2021. Going on from there, I decided to keep collecting stories. I got a really good response for those stories, and people were beginning to say to me, yes, this is really good. I wanted to be very balanced, I wanted a lot of very different stories. So that was my inspiration.
So I haven't watched the news on TV since 2013, with the exception of 2 weeks in March of 2020, during the start of the nonsense. And I remember seeing in Parliament at the time that the Coronavirus Act of 2020 was being passed. I was seeing Boris Johnson sat there in the pew, far from looking Churchillian, as he very much saw himself, but his body language suggesting that he was crushed and that it was all wrong, which of course it was. And I remember reading about the SAGE group at the time, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. One of the members at the time, Sarah Gilbert, who co-founded the harmful AstraZeneca vaccine, also founded a company called Vaxitech. Vaxitech had investment from a company called Google Ventures, the sort of venture capital arm of Google. And I kind of thought to myself, let's talk about vaccines that's coming in. Maybe it has some kind of technology element in it, and it didn't feel very good at all. In 2020, when the PCR test came out, my uncle works for the Southampton General Hospital, and he was working at the time at the intensive care unit as an administrator. And at the time said when people were being admitted to the ward, they had to take a PCR test. Basically, and things generally in the ward is people that have had a serious accident. So that's a PCR test to see if they also had COVID. And he said the tests were very unreliable. Sometimes the tests would be positive, sometimes they'd be negative for one person. So what they would do is they would give them the test every day until there were 2 positive tests. Elon Musk said something very similar. He said he took 4 tests, taken in a day, or within a few days, 2 positive, 2 negative. Clearly not fit for purpose. clearly a fraud. And in 2022, I had a strong instinct to want to connect with people as much as possible. Really a reaction to the massive disconnect that the government was trying to do to stop us from connecting. Their guidance telling people to disconnect as much as possible, to stay at home, only go outside for an hour, wearing masks behind people's faces, observe the curfew, remember that? The regional tier system, bubble, the rule of six, and of course, social distancing, which really was anti-social distancing, wasn't it? And remember those days when you had long queues around the supermarket car park to get in, and then it'd be like the traffic light system, green or red. And I remember sometimes you'd walk along the street and someone would rather take their risk jumping out in front of a car than passing you on your side of the road. So much was the fear. But the lady was a bit upset. Her mum, who was in her 80s, who was fit and well, had what we considered at the time a cold. The lady's sister, who was living in the UK, insisted that her mum go to the hospital. I'm not sure whether she had a PCR test, it doesn't make a difference, because it's a fraud. But, so her sister took her to the hospital. Within 2 weeks, her healthy mother was dead. I'm not sure whether she'd had morphine and midazolam, I'm not sure, but basically, this lady was very upset that being over in Gibraltar, that her sister in the UK had taken her mum to the hospital. If her sister hadn't spoken to their mum and said like she had a cold, her mum would still be alive. Tragic story. One final story, in late 2021, early 2022, at the Standard Park near Barton-on-Sea, which is between Southampton and Bournemouth, one Sunday morning a guy turns up from London. He was a fireman, and he was upset and angry. And it was a time when you took the PCR test, if it was positive, stay at home for 2 weeks. Also, it said at the time that the fireman could just phone up and say he didn't have to take a test if he had the symptoms. That's fine, you stay at home for 2 weeks. And even the firemen that would just pretend to have symptoms just so they could have 2 weeks at home off work. And at the time, a third of the firemen in London were at home. The reason he was upset? A week earlier, a young family had died in a house fire in London because there weren't enough firemen. Really tragic, some of the stories. But it's really important that we collect these stories, like Rosanne is doing, collecting these stories for such a unique time in history. And the nonsense of the last 6 years, I have not met so many wonderful, beautiful souls, many of which are here today. I'm certainly grateful to you, Rosanne. Where is she? Rosanne? Rosanne? Hi. I'm certainly grateful to you, Rosanne, for your friendship and for producing these really, really important books. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Came from the New Forest today, staying overnight, and just to be here today, so I really appreciate that. And Bob's story is in book form. And now I'd like to introduce you to another of my wonderful writers, Daygan, who is local, many of you know him, and he's going to decide whether he wants to speak with the microphone or not.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rosanne. It's not too bad, yeah, well, unlike Bob, I'm not very prepared, but I'll just sort of wing it and talk a bit about what happened. So, around lockdown, like about a year and a half before, I'd lost my father, and I decided to look after my mum, because nobody could in the family for different reasons, so I brought mum down here. And she's got, mobility problems, osteorheumatoid. And in the lockdown, she needed a shoulder operation. So you can imagine what that was like, sort of dealing with hospitals when you had a very different opinion to all the lies that were going on, and the sort of hatred thrown at us. And at that time as well, because the mum had all the facts about she wasn't just looking at the BBC, of course, she had all the facts about what was going on and what was going in the vaccines, decided not to, wisely. Is that better? Yeah. So basically what I found around at that time is that I felt really quite harassed by the NHS at the time. Well, with the programme, it wasn't, you know, the nurse's fault or anything, but with the programme of like trying to get people coerced into doing it and peer pressured. And I had so many texts, letters, home visits, all kinds of stuff to try and get vaccinations in to my mother and myself, but mainly my mum. So when I was taking mum into hospital, basically it was for a shoulder operation, and then she was lying on the bed in the hospital for tests before the operation, and they brought out this vaccine, and it's lucky my mum had her wits about her, because she said, "What's that?" And they said, "We noticed she didn't have a COVID shot." My mum said she didn't want it, but I did think about other, you know, very elderly people, or people who aren't fully able to make a decision. That probably would have ended up in them, you know. So that's how much they were pushing the programme of death, really. So yeah, she had the operation, that was okay, but yeah, it was all the harassment of trying to get these injections into us, you know. And I've noticed recently it's all to do with like lung cancer recently. I don't know if anybody else has been getting texts and harassment with that, but that's the next one that seems to be happening currently. But my mum never actually got COVID until quite recently. She had a fall in December and ended up in hospital and ended up getting COVID, and she got over it, you know. I mean, it's such an illusion, all of that, you know. It's just like a flu or a cold, you know, but they were saying it's COVID. But anyway, nowadays they don't stop you going in hospitals and seeing your mum if, you know, I went in even when they said she had COVID. But yeah, if there's any questions, I don't really know what to say. I mean, I'm in the book with the story there, and I didn't have anything prepared, like Bob. I mean, you covered a lot there, Bob, anyway, with what was going on at the beginning of what you said, which I was going to mention quite a lot of that. But yeah, all I can say is that, like, you know, these people who didn't want to lose their jobs or who wanted to fly somewhere, or the family members, all the coercion isn't consent, and that's what was going on, and that's why I felt like I had to say something, because it's just wrong, and it's I don't buy into any of it.
Daygan, how was it living in a community in Glastonbury at that time?
Yeah, the Glastonbury community was a big support, actually. Like some of you know that I'm a musician, and I was actually finding it hard to find people to play with, so every week we'd go up and play Kirtan, you know, on top of the tour. So I carried on as much as possible, as long as possible. And a lot of other people did, and we would go up there every week throughout lockdown and play music together and sing, you know. So we carried on as normal. The police did come up a couple of times, but we couldn't actually do anything, you know, because, you know, it's a form of exercise, and this is a part of practice, and being an artist, you want inspiration, and, you know, tried to stop it a few times, but we carried on. So it was a very supportive and good community, though I did have people that have known me for decades who suddenly stopped speaking to me because they knew that I didn't get vaccinated and didn't want it and didn't believe in all that. And some of them still do, strangely, even though we are where we are with it today, where it doesn't seem to be a big thing if you walk into a hospital without a mask nowadays or whatever. Yeah, so yeah, it's just interesting in the community. There was a real divide here, it was a real shame. But I think that is part of the plan, you know, to divide and conquer. And if they're not trying to get a split over injection or not, it's other things, isn't it, with so many different things at the moment. but always cause separation and stay at home and stay behind screens and not interact with one another. You know, it's sort of all part of the plan. Anyway, I don't know what else to say other than what's in the book. Thanks to Rosanne for making this happen and bring it all out. You know, it's wonderful work. Thank you. Thanks for what you do. Got any questions?
The whole point of it was to, as I said before, read each other's stories and try to understand that we don't all see things the same way. And that's very, very important. For me, it's very, very important that people are not ridiculing each other, calling each other names, because they don't think the same way as they do.
It's pro-choice, isn't it? Pro-choice.
It's pro-choice, absolutely. So another question I asked my writers at the beginning of the week was, where were they when COVID struck? And for me, I sort of rewind to 2019, when my home was in Spain with Joe and Bob, and I went back to see my parents. Mum wasn't well, I needed to stay and support her. It's a time Joe refers to as the time I abandoned my family in Spain. They were all grown up and they could look after themselves, and I was needed, my parents needed me. So I spent most of 2019 in England. And Mum wasn't well, she ended up in hospital. Fast forward, we managed to get her out of hospital, and Mum and Dad went into a very lovely care home near Chichester in West Sussex, and I managed to sort of support them. They wanted the family home to be sold because they could no longer manage it. So I found myself in England, in the family home where I'd grown up, you know, looking after Mum and Dad, going in and out to see them each day, putting a house on the market, and also running my business in Spain, which fortunately I was the admin person, so I could do that, you know, from a laptop sitting in West Sussex, so that was no problem. So we made a plan, and the plan was to get Mum out of hospital, book them in for 6 weeks to this care home, for Mum to get well, and for Mum and Dad to decide where they wanted to be. Years before, we'd asked them to come and live in Spain with us. Dad didn't want to leave England, so that moment had passed. So now we had a situation that they needed to make a decision of where to be, and it wasn't coming home to Spain with me. But with all the best laid plans, they don't always go exactly as we would like them. And and Mum died, so Dad was left in the home. I was left at the family home then on my own, backing up the house, and I carried on the routine, but this time, of course, for a few months only going in there to see Mum and to see Dad. And in and out I went. By this time, Marianne and the children had joined me in England, which was absolutely wonderful. I wasn't on my own anymore. And one day in March, and I should say that during that time, every afternoon, by the time I got to Dad, it was about 1:30, 2 in the day, and you know, I'd bowl in, "Hi Dad, how are you?" "I'm absolutely fine." We've already watched the news a couple of times that day, and we'd spend the afternoon chatting and reminiscing together, and then inevitably over tea we would watch the news again together, and that was when I first heard of COVID. And I have to say that I felt terribly sorry for the poor people in Wuhan, China. What a terrible thing to be happening to them. But it wasn't in England. You know, like many things over the years, we feel very distressed about things that are happening to people all around the world. But it's not actually affecting us. So I felt sad for them, got on with my life. Then one day, early March, I did my usual, walked Dad down to supper to be with the other people. "Bye Dad, see you tomorrow." Drove home and I had a call from the home saying I could no longer go and visit him. So I realised that this terrible thing that was going on in China was knocking at our door. I couldn't see Dad anymore. So I think it's very important for me to say at this stage that I went into an absolute panic of fear, panic. I didn't know what to do. Luckily, I've got very sensible, practical children. Mariana, Joe, my eldest son, we all spoke. I phoned Dad. I said, Dad, I can't come to see you tomorrow. I can't come to see you for the moment. And he said, I know, we've been told in the home. And he sort of slipped straight back into World War II mode. Said, it's all right, darling, it's fine. We'll all be fine. We just need to do what they ask us to do. The government knows what to do. And as soon as you can, come back and see me. But don't worry about me. I'll be fine. You just look after yourselves. So with the family home about to be sold, with all the decisions we had to make, Mariana and Pasha were in America, Talon and I were in Sussex, Bob and Joe were in Spain, Dad and my eldest son David were in England. As I say, I was in complete panic because all I really wanted to do was collect them all up and look after them all and make sure we were all safe. And I mention that because that's helped me a lot over the years when I've heard people criticising others for being fearful and not being able to make a decision. I think it was really good for me to experience what it was to feel that fear, to feel that panic, and not to be able to make a reasonable decision. I was irrational. Mariana Will and Joe will tell you how irrational I was at that stage. Anyway, luckily, as I say, I had good advice from them. If I couldn't go in and see Dad anymore, what was the point of being in England? So Mariana and Pasha flew back from America. My eldest son came down to see us and help us sort of do things out. We booked flights back to Spain, and we flew into Spain hours before the lockdown in Spain. So that was all quite hectic. We drove off from the family home in the early hours of the morning. Not what I ever expected to leave it in that way. And we drove on very deserted roads to Gatwick Airport. We then went through a very eerily deserted Gatwick Airport. Mariana, myself and the children. We then sat in the departure lounge with perhaps 12 other people. Everybody was sitting apart, heads down, no communication. And I can remember thinking back to all the joyous occasions that I and the family and the children and the grandchildren had travelled back and forth all through those years when I lived in Spain. We got onto the flight. We were 15 people. Everybody else was scattered around the plane, not a sound, no communication whatsoever. Got off in Alicante, it was deserted. The drive home along a beautiful, beautiful road along the coast up to our home from Alicante, deserted. I then spent a couple of weeks with Mariana and the children, and then I went back to my home. Joe and I had to plan together the time of day that he would drive, only 5 minutes down the road, but nevertheless, the time of day he would drive down to pick me up, so that we wouldn't be seen by the police, so that we had the least chance to be seen by the police and be questioned. So he came down and got me, we got home, and then I realised how wonderful it was to actually be back in my own home. Yeah. Sorry. So we had our first lockdown in Spain. It was very, very strict in Spain. It was a bit like Italy. The rules and regulations for us at that time were that one person in each household could shop once a week at their nearest supermarket. One person could walk out 1 kilometre from their home with their dog, so people started sharing their dogs so that people could actually get out of their homes. We were very fortunate. We had a lovely little home with lots of land around us and didn't need to get out. Mariana, on the other hand, with small children, the rule for her was that the children weren't allowed out for 7 weeks. Do you remember?
Yeah.
7 weeks. The children had to be inside. So I started doing my weekly shopping trips. Our beautiful town of Javier just turned into a bit of a ghost town. We had to wear masks even walking in the street on our own. Driving down to the supermarket, I was stopped every time by the police on a roundabout where I had to drive past. And they could have been quite friendly. They could have said, oh, hello, are you okay? Where have you come from? Where are you going? It could have been quite a polite conversation. They'd have still got the same information, but it wasn't like that. Hi, Carla. Come in. Hi, Aid. Welcome, welcome. Get comfortable. So anyway, we were questioned. We were actually interrogated. They wore masks and they held machine guns. And they stood at the window. Put your window down. Where have you come from? Where are you going? And on the way back from the supermarket, when you said, I'm coming back from the supermarket, they would often, not always, but they would often ask you to get out of the car, check your boot, check your shopping bags, to make sure you hadn't bought too much, because then you were panic buying, or too little, because then you'd need to go back out again. So it's pretty horrendous. And quite often from the supermarket, I would ring Mariana, and I would say to her, I'm going to drive back home now, but I'm going to come past you. Please bring the children out onto the balcony so I can see you and wave to you. And hope I didn't get stopped by the police and questioned as to why I wasn't taking a straight journey home. So it was very, very strict. Fast forward, there were two things that were trigger points for me. One, I think a sort of comfort back plan that I just had in my head, I don't think I ever talked about it to anyone, was that if things got really bad, worse, between us we could jump in 3 cars, with a bag, with our children, with our dogs, and drive through Spain, through France, and get back to England. I always had that back plan. And then one day, I heard on the news that France were going to close their borders. So for me, that was, okay, now things are getting serious. Now we have to seriously think about whether we want to be here or not, to be in this country. The second thing that was my absolute trigger point was when, after the 7 weeks of the children not being allowed out, Mariana walked the children down to the port beach in Javier, where we lived, and she got to the beach to find other mums sitting at a distance from each other. She sat there with the children, and the children, obviously, they've been shut in their homes for 7 weeks, they naturally ran down to the water to help paddle. And the police came down onto the beach and told the children they couldn't go in the water because of COVID, it was dangerous. One of the children ran back into the water, and the police came down onto the beach and marched that mother off the beach with her child. And when Mariana came home and told me that,
and they have machine guns coming down the beach towards all these different mothers with their children, running at us with machine guns. It was absolutely wild. Absolutely wild.
So when Marion came back and told me that, I thought, that's it. I love this country. I fell in love with Spain a long time ago. Mariana's dad and Mariana and her older brother, their dad is Spanish. I fell in love with that country a long time ago, and the people and the sunshine was a bonus. But for me, that was it. That was the end of my relationship with Spain. And luckily, Mariana, Joe, and Bob, we were all on the same page. So we started, if you like, planning our escape from Spain. Our airports, we had 2 local airports, Alicante and Valencia. They were both closed. Everybody said, you won't get out. There isn't a way out. How can you do it? So we booked flights from Barcelona. Joe drove us. On the morning of the 7th of June 2020, Joe drove us to Valencia train station, left us there. I was desperately worried until I knew he was home safely, because I was worried he would be stopped by the police and questioned. We got our train up to Barcelona. From Barcelona, which was like a ghost town in the airport, do you remember sitting there? Everything was completely quiet. All we could see were a line of police vans at the end. It was horrible. Then we went through to the departure lounge, onto the plane, where the crew told me that they'd actually been flying 2 flights daily, packed, between Barcelona and Heathrow. So I realised that it wasn't true what we were hearing, that people couldn't travel. People were travelling. So we got back to London. I'd had to leave Bluebell, who was about 7 months at the time, and Marianne and the children, they had a puppy of 7 months as well, Molly, who's not here today. We had to leave them with my sister in Guildford. So the first thing we did when we landed, and we stayed in a hotel overnight, that's another story. And we drove immediately to pick up our puppies from my sister's house in Guildford. All I can remember is my brother-in-law's hand coming out of the door, and we picked up the dogs. And we drove on down to Sussex. I had naively thought, when we booked a little B&B in Sussex for a couple of nights, that I could immediately go and see my dad, but I couldn't. I had to have 2 weeks in the country before I could go and see him. Anyway, we stayed those 2 nights in Sussex, and then we drove to Taunton. We had decided to rent a little railway cottage in Taunton for a month, and our task in that month was to decide which area to live in and find a house big enough for the whole family that would also accept dogs. Anyway, fast forward, a gift fell into our lap, a house that was big enough for us on the outskirts of Glastonbury, and the lady literally handed it over to us, furnished, and we spent 2 years there. So that's my memory of the first lockdown, was in Spain. We then had the rest of the year of the second lockdown in England. Joe joined us. Joe had said he wanted to last summer in Spain with all his friends. He had his life there. But he said that he would fly back by the end of August. And on the 31st of August, I went and picked him up from Bristol Airport, so Joe was home. And a month later, his beautiful dog hitched a lift with a man in a van, a man that we knew, and he brought Ollie to us. So by the end of September, Ollie was home. And at that time, the house hadn't sold in Spain. Bob decided to stay in Spain for a while to do what he was doing. So there we were. So that's really my story that I asked my writers for. That's my story of where I was when COVID struck, how I felt, and how we went through that first year.